No one really noticed the woman that morning. She arrived before the bugle before the sun when the air was still thick with fog and the training field lay untouched. At the edge of the range, she sat quietly cleaning an old rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. Not out of routine. It felt more like reverence. Her hand trembled, just slightly, maybe from the cold, maybe not. A young recruit walked past and scoffed, half joking. "Polishing it again, ma'am, or just afraid you won't get the chance to use it?" She didn't look up, didn't flinch. Instead, she folded a small silver cloth, its edges frayed with 3 faint letters stitched near the corner, AGR 26. She slipped it into her breast pocket and kept cleaning. And though the recruit couldn't explain why, he walked away quieter than he came. Sometimes silence says more than rank ever could. If you've ever felt that, stay with this story. They didn't know her name at first. To most of the new recruits, she was just the woman in gray. No rank on her collar, no medals on her chest, just an old ID tag scratched and half unreadable. But she was always there earlier than everyone, quieter than anyone. She never missed a morning, never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, she chose her words like they cost something. Some thought she was just another admin reassigned to the field. Others said she used to be someone, before she got hurt, but no one knew for sure. There was something in the way she carried herself, not proud, not broken, just steady and watchful, like someone who had seen too much to pretend anymore. She never corrected them, never offered her story, and maybe that's what made them start watching her more closely. Sometimes the quiet ones don't need to be heard to be felt. Have you ever known someone like that? There was something else about her, too. She was always early, not just a few minutes, but the kind of early that made people wonder if she ever really left. By the time the rest of the squad arrived, she'd already done her first lap, prepped her gear, and stood at the far end of the field, hands behind her back, eyes steady on the horizon. She never looked rushed, never checked the time, as if her body remembered a rhythm no one else followed. Some recruits joked about it. Maybe she sleeps in the bushes, but not unkindly. There was a quiet respect building, not because she demanded it, but because she never seemed to need it. And slowly, people started arriving a little earlier, like they didn't want to miss whatever she might do next. Discipline can't always be taught. Sometimes, it's simply lived. Have you ever learned from someone without them ever saying a word? Each morning, just before formation, she would pull out a small piece of silver cloth from her pocket, frayed at the edges, folded neatly. She never let it touch the ground. She would lay it gently across her lap while cleaning her weapon like it mattered more than the rifle itself. No one asked about it. Not yet. But people noticed. There were faint letters stitched into the corner. GR 26. No one knew what it meant. Some figured it was a unit number. Others thought it might be initials, or maybe a code. But she never explained. And the more she stayed silent about it, the more it seemed like something sacred. You could feel it, even if you didn't understand it, like a quiet moment at a gravesite, when words wouldn't help anyway. We all carry pieces of memory that no one else sees. Have you ever held on to something not because of what it is, but because of who it reminds you of? There was only one person who seemed to know more than he let on. Sergeant Harold Knox. Older than most in the camp. He worked supply runs, cleaned the firing range, and kept mostly to himself. But every morning, without fail, he'd pause for a moment as he passed her. Not to talk, just a quiet nod, like he was tipping his hat to something only he recognized. One morning, a younger recruit whispered, "Why does she always inspect everyone's boots?" Knox didn't answer right away. He just stared at the dirt, then murmured, "I'd check mine too. If I'd seen someone die 'cause their laces were wrong." No explanation, no follow-up, and the boy didn't laugh again after that. Sometimes people don't carry rank. They carry history, and when you meet someone like that, you don't interrupt, you listen. It happened during a morning drill. A recruit tripped nothing serious, just loose gravel under his boots. But before he even hit the ground, Ellie was already moving. She didn't rush, she didn't call out. She just reached into his side pack, his own, not hers, and pulled out a bandage roll. Already there. Later, he swore he hadn't packed it. No one had, except her. She must have slipped it in without a word. Hours before, maybe even the day before, no one understood how she knew, but after that people started checking their gear twice, and some of them, without quite realizing, began walking more carefully when she was watching. It wasn't fear, it was something else, like they sensed she wasn't judging them. She was preparing them. There's a difference between being trained and being ready. Sometimes the ones who've seen the worst are the first to make sure it doesn't happen again. Every camp has one. The loud one, the fast one, the one who's sure he knows how this all works because nothing's ever gone wrong for him. Here, that was Jack Trenton. Young, sharp, confident in the way only someone untouched by consequence can be. He saw Ellie's silence and called it weird, saw her precision and called it overkill. "You'd think she's prepping for a war that already ended," he muttered once loud enough for a few others to hear. No one laughed, but no one pushed back either, not yet. Jack didn't mean harm, not really. He just didn't understand that some people don't move like soldiers anymore. They move like survivors, and that's a pace you don't judge until you've had to walk it. It's easy to speak when you've never had to swallow silence. But time and truth has a way of humbling us all. Jack wasn't the only one confused by her. There was something else about Ellie that unsettled a few of them, nothing dramatic, just subtle. She never looked anyone in the eye, not directly. When someone spoke to her, she'd nod politely, even respond when needed. But her gaze always drifted downward, to their boots. At first, people thought it was just habit, maybe nerves. Maybe she was shy, but one afternoon a younger recruit asked, "Why does she keep looking at our shoes?" Nobody answered, and, in the corner, Sergeant Knox looked up from his clipboard, paused, then quietly said, "Some people never forget where the blood landed." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. And from that day on, a few more boots got tied a little tighter. Sometimes what people notice isn't what you say, it's what you can't stop seeing. That week's drill was brutal. Heat rose off the field in waves, and recruits dropped one by one, pushed past the point of comfort, then past the point of pride. Most instructors would have barked commands, shouted encouragement, warned them when they were slipping. But Ellie, she said nothing. She just stood beneath the bleacher's shadow arms behind her back, eyes tracking every step. Not cold, not angry, just still. One recruit stumbled on his third lap and cursed under his breath, expecting a reprimand, maybe even help, but Ellie didn't move. She simply watched. And somehow, that stung more than being yelled at, because her silence didn't feel like disapproval. It felt like memory. Like she'd seen someone stumble before, and this time she needed to know if he'd stand back up on his own. There are lessons that don't come with instruction. Sometimes the test is whether you keep going without being told to. It happened quickly. During cool-down, one of the recruits, Jack, was slouching just enough to catch her eye. She walked past him, steady and measured as always, then paused, turned slightly, and, without looking him fully in the face, she said, "Eli, straighten your spine." Jack blinked. "Ma'am." "It's Jack," he added, uncertain. But Ellie didn't correct herself, didn't explain. She just gave a quiet nod more to herself than to him and walked away. Some of the others didn't notice. Some did, and a few glanced at each other confused. Wondering who was Eli, Jack said nothing more. But later that night, as he lay awake in his bunk, he found himself repeating that name in his head, not with anger, but with a strange, unexpected ache. Sometimes a name isn't a mistake. It's a memory that slipped through the cracks. The name lingered, not in the air, but in the silence that followed. No one brought it up at dinner, not even Jack, but you could feel it the way you feel a storm coming long before the sky turns. Later that night, Jack leaned against the doorway of the supply shed, watching Knox sort through faded boxes. Almost casually, he asked, "Did she ever know someone named Eli Knox?" Didn't look up. He just kept folding Tarp's hands, moving slower than usual. Then, in a voice softer than Jack expected, he said, "Once." He had a crooked smile, always double-knotted his laces. That was it. No more. No less. Jack waited for a follow-up. There wasn't one, because some answers aren't spoken. They're carried. When someone disappears from the world, they don't always leave it. Sometimes they live on in the way someone else says a name, just once, without meaning to. The next morning, the frost hit harder than usual, the kind that clings to metal and memory alike. Ellie stood by the fence line where the training field meets the woods. No one was around, just her and the quiet. She took a slow breath, the kind that hurts a little when it hits your chest. Her eyes scanned the tree line, but not like she was looking at something. More like she was remembering where something used to be. In that moment, her fingers brushed against her pocket, not for warmth, but for something folded inside. She didn't pull it out, just held it. And, for a brief second in the shifting light, you could almost see it, a shape, a figure, dragging someone through snow too deep to walk in. But then it was gone, like breath on glass. Not all memories are stories. Some are simply moments that never stop happening inside us. By midday, the camp was alive again. Laughter, boots in rhythm, voices raised and echoed across the field. But Ellie stayed quiet as always, until during a partner drill one of the recruits hesitated, lost his grip, stumbled. Without raising her voice, Ellie stepped forward and said, "Ridgeline form," staggered. "Eyes up. Ghost protocol." The words hung there. Not loud, not sharp, but they changed something in the air. Most of the recruits blinked, confused. To them, it was just gibberish. Old lingo, maybe. Something outdated. But over by the mess tent, Sergeant Knox paused mid-step. His head turned slowly toward her, and for the first time in a long time, his eyes softened. He didn't speak, just touched the corner of his hat and stood still like someone who'd heard an echo they thought was long gone. Some phrases aren't meant to instruct. They're meant to remember. Later that day, Jack found himself back in the supply shed. He wasn't looking for anything. At least, that's what he told himself. But his hands pulled open the third cabinet anyway, the one labeled Archive. Prior units. Inside, old maps, faded rosters, weathered photos no one had touched in years. He flipped through them like someone looking for a name they hadn't yet heard until something stopped him. A black and white photo, 7 soldiers standing in snow up to their knees. No smiles, just eyes. Sharp, exhausted, still alive. In the corner, scribbled faintly in pen, Ghost Ridge, 26 down, 3 returned. And just below that barely legible, GR 26. His breath caught just for a second. He didn't know what it all meant. But suddenly, he knew it wasn't just a number stitched into a piece of cloth. It was a name, a story, one he hadn't earned the right to tell, but maybe to listen to. Sometimes the past doesn't come knocking. Sometimes it just waits until someone's finally quiet enough to notice it. That evening, Jack caught Knox alone again outside the mess hall, staring up at the fading sky like it owed him something. Jack didn't ask right away. He just stood beside him for a while, quiet, learning maybe that silence could also be a kind of respect. Finally, he said, "There were 3, right." From Ghost Ridge. Knox didn't look surprised, didn't ask how Jack knew. He just nodded. 3 of us came back, he said. 1 didn't walk again. 1 never stopped shaking. And 1 came back quiet. He rubbed his fingers together like he could still feel the cold through his skin. That last one, he added voice, barely a breath, was the strongest of us all. Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to, because in that moment, something shifted. The woman everyone thought was fragile was actually the one who'd carried the rest. Some people survive by holding on. Others, by holding everyone else together. They didn't talk about it. There were no announcements, no meetings, no change in the daily routine. But something shifted. The jokes stopped. Not because someone got in trouble, but because they no longer felt right. When Ellie walked across the field now, more backs straightened. More eyes followed not out of curiosity, but out of something quieter. Not fear, not even admiration really, respect. The kind that comes when you realize someone's lived through things you'll never have to. She hadn't changed. She still spoke little, still watched everything without needing to control it, but the space around her had changed. As if everyone had collectively taken one step back, not to exclude her, but to give her the room she had earned. Sometimes reverence doesn't come from what someone says. It comes from what you feel when they simply stand in the room. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. They were loading packs for a steep climb. Standard drill, nothing unusual, until one recruit, Ben, reached for his strap too quickly. Ellie saw it, a half-second shift in his footing, a bend in the ankle that didn't look right. She didn't shout, didn't startle him. She simply gave a short shake of her head, followed by a gentle hand raised not in command, but in quiet warning. He stopped, reset his footing, then kept going. A minute later, the strap he would have yanked snapped clean. He stared at it for a long time, then turned toward her. She didn't look back, didn't nod, didn't smile, she just moved on. But Ben stood there a moment longer, the weight of what didn't happen settling deeper than any pack ever could. Sometimes leadership isn't in what you stop. It's in what you quietly keep from happening. That night's drill was supposed to be routine, navigation, night movement. Just enough challenge to teach awareness, not enough to scare anyone. But halfway through the power cut. Suddenly, the path lit only by stars and a shallow breath. No moon, no markers. You could hear the hesitation ripple boots, stalling whispers rising. Then before panic could build a sharp hiss, a flare arcing into the sky. Soft red light spilled across the trees just enough to see by. In the center of it all stood Ellie, flare launcher in one hand, expression calm, eyes already scanning routes like she'd expected this, and maybe she had. Afterward, someone asked quietly off to the side, why'd she have a flare in her pack that wasn't part of the drill? No one answered. But Knox, passing by, simply muttered, "Some people don't wait for permission to be prepared." Survival isn't always about instinct. Sometimes it's about never assuming the lights will stay on. Back in the barracks, no one said much. They packed up, wrote notes, cleaned their boots longer than necessary. But something lingered. Later that night, Jack sat on the bunk across from hers. Ellie wasn't asleep, just staring out the window like she was listening for something only she could hear. The room was quiet, save for the soft click of Jack's pen tapping. Then, almost without thinking, he said, "The flare." "You knew we'd freeze. You didn't even hesitate." She didn't answer, but her jaw moved just slightly like she was deciding whether the silence deserved to stay. Then, Jack softer now added, "I saw the photo. Ghost Ridge, GR26. Her eyes didn't shift, but her hand lifted slowly to her temple. There, just beneath her hairline, a scar. Thin, precise, long faded, but never hidden. She didn't speak, but she didn't flinch either, and in that stillness Jack realized she'd never covered it up, because some scars weren't shameful. They were maps. Not all stories need to be told out loud. Some are told by what a person never tries to hide. It wasn't in the manual, wasn't required. No one told her to do it. But every morning without fail, Ellie was awake at 4:17. Not 4:15, not 4:30, 4:17. She'd be outside before the lights came on, bootlaces already tied, standing still facing north as if she were waiting for something that never quite arrived. Jack noticed it first when he got assigned early kitchen duty. He rubbed his eyes, surprised to see her out there already alone in the chill, watching the sky lighten ever so slowly. The second time he saw it, he checked his watch. 4:17. He almost asked why. Almost. But something in her posture stopped him. Not cold, not angry, just distant. Like time had paused there once and she stood in that minute so no one else would have to. Some mornings aren't for starting over. They're for remembering who didn't get another. The wind that night was harsher than usual. Most had turned in early cold seeps into bones faster when you're tired. Jack stayed back, cleaning up near the admin tent. That's when he saw it. A small, weather-worn notebook tucked beneath Ellie's folded jacket on the bench. He didn't mean to touch it, didn't flip through it, but when he moved the jacket to keep it from falling, the notebook slipped open. Just one page, just one line. Evan said, "Don't stop walking. Not for me, not for anything." And under it, only initials ED, March 14th. Jack didn't need to know who Evan was. He didn't need to ask, because some names don't require backstory. Some losses are whole stories by themselves. He closed the notebook, carefully placed it back where it belonged. Didn't say a word the next day. But when Ellie walked past him that morning for the first time, he nodded first. And, for a heartbeat, just barely, she nodded back. Grief doesn't always wear black. Sometimes it carries a notebook and wakes up at 4:17. The trail was slick that morning. Wet earth clung to boots, and the slope near Checkpoint 3 had taken down 3 cadets already. But the fourth, a girl named Rivera, fell harder. Her ankle twisted beneath her gear scattered across the incline. She tried to laugh it off, but her hands trembled as she reached for her canteen. Everyone else froze, unsure if they should help or if that would embarrass her more. Then Ellie walked past. Didn't say a word. But instead of pulling Rivera up, she knelt beside her. Slow, steady, and stayed there. Not rushing, not rescuing, just being with her. Rivera stared, confused. Ellie finally spoke low and quiet. "You don't always need to stand right away. Sometimes you just need someone to sit with you until you can." It was barely above a whisper, but it reached the whole line. Strength isn't just lifting others. Sometimes it's choosing to kneel when you no longer have to. The next day, no one mentioned what Ellie did on the trail. No praise, no briefing debrief. But the shift had started. During water break, one of the younger cadets, Jonas, saw Mark struggling with his straps. Usually, someone would shout across Titan left, "You're dragging." But this time, Jonas didn't yell. He walked over, knelt down, and helped fix the weight balance. Didn't say a word. Just a nod, then back to position. It wasn't dramatic. No applause, But that night someone else cleaned Rivera's gear rack. Another offered half his ration bar to the one who fell behind. And for the first time since Ellie arrived, she wasn't the only one awake at 4:17. Jack stood next to her, didn't speak, just matched her silence as if it were a new kind of language they were all beginning to learn. The strongest leaders don't demand followers. They quietly teach others how to stand and kneel by example. It had been 3 weeks. No one dared call Ellie Sergeant anymore, not out of disrespect, but because somehow the title felt too small. They started calling her ma'am with a softness that didn't weaken the word. Jack had begun to notice patterns. How she always gave the last of the hot water to someone else. How she never sat with her back to a door. How she'd stop mid-step if a shadow moved wrong in her periphery. It wasn't fear, it was memory made into instinct. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Jack asked her the question that had lingered longest. "How do you stay this calm?" Ellie didn't answer right away. She let the quiet hold space between them like she often did. Then finally, "I don't," she said. "I just learned not to speak in Panic's voice." Jack didn't reply. He just sat beside her, and in that moment he understood Ellie hadn't come back to teach them how to fight. She came back to teach them how to return from it. There are people who shout through storms, and then there are those who become the calm after. The drill wasn't supposed to be real. A nighttime navigation run. Simple. Controlled. But fog rolled in early and a faulty flare went off too close to the brush. Private Reddick, only 18, knew panicked. He dropped his compass turned the wrong way and tripped face first into a ravine's edge. The others froze. Some shouted. One cursed. Jack was halfway through calling Ellie, but she was already there. No barked commands, no blame. Just Ellie crouching near Reddick, her flashlight angled low, never at his eyes. She didn't ask if he was okay, didn't ask why he ran. Instead, "Let's breathe here for a second," she said. "You don't owe Panic your obedience." Reddick blinked, teeth chattering more from shame than cold. But Ellie just stayed. Still, warm, present. And slowly the others started stepping forward again. Not to fix, but to join. True steadiness isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing who you become in the middle of it. They gathered in the mess hall long after lights out. Someone had asked timidly, "Was it true, Ghost Line?" No one expected her to answer, but Ellie, eyes still on her cup, said quietly, "I don't talk about what happened, not because I can't, but because every time I do, someone starts seeing ghosts they didn't earn." Silence fell. She stirred her tea once, twice. "We weren't heroes," she added. "We were cold, we were scared, and we kept walking. That's all. It wasn't deflection. It was invitation to stop chasing legends and start understanding people." Jack, sitting 2 seats down, finally understood why she never liked spotlights. Because in the dark, the weight of truth feels heavier, but also more sacred. The bravest stories aren't told in full. They're carried quietly, honestly, by those who lived them. It was the youngest recruit who asked. Late one evening, long after most had turned in, he lingered by the edge of the mess tent. Ellie was rinsing her mug, the lights casting soft shadows across her scar. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said, voice barely above whisper. "Did you ever break?" Ellie didn't turn, didn't stiffen, just breathed in. Slow, measured. She set the mug down, still wet. "Of course I did," she said quietly. "But no one's around to mark the moment when it happens. It's never a grand fall. It's more like forgetting how to hope for 5 minutes straight." The recruit's eyes welled just slightly. "What did you do after Ellie finally looked at him?" "I picked up someone else's pack. Sometimes carrying helps you remember you're still here." He didn't reply, just nodded. And for the first time he understood leadership wasn't just about never falling. It was about standing again, even when your hands still shook. The strongest ones break too. They just learned how to rebuild, without noise. The morning after that quiet conversation, something shifted. Ellie arrived at the field at 0600. Same boots, same calm gait, but this time she wasn't the first. Jack was already there. Then came Reddick. Then Mira. Not a word spoken, just presence. Someone started setting up the course without being told. Someone else passed out canteens, no orders needed. Ellie stood watching them. No one saluted. No one gave speeches. But, somehow, everything felt like a salute. The air was crisp, but warmer than usual. And for a long, quiet moment, Ellie allowed herself something she rarely did. A breath of stillness. A flicker of peace. Because maybe, Just maybe, they were beginning to understand that strength wasn't just in what she had survived, it was in what she chose to stay for. Sometimes respect doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly just before sunrise with your name unspoken, and your presence felt. That evening the mess hall felt different. Same trays, same hum of conversation, but under it all, something gentler. Ellie, as always, sat near the corner. Same spot, same rhythm, slow, quiet, methodical. She didn't glance up, didn't expect company. She never did. And yet, Jack walked past 3 open tables to sit across from her. No words. Then Mira, then Reddick. One by one. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer thanks. They just brought their trays and stayed. It wasn't about eating together. It was about not letting her eat alone anymore. No rank, no roles, just presence. Shared silence carried together. And in that silence, for the first time since her return, Ellie's jaw unclenched. Just slightly. Sometimes the loudest we see you is a seat taken without invitation. And the deepest healing begins with not having to explain. The morning light crept slowly across the field, soft, golden quiet. Ellie arrived at 0600. Same boots, same steady stride, but today, she wasn't first. Jack was already there. Then Mira, then Reddick. No one spoke. No one saluted. They just showed up early, present ready. Someone had laid out the gear course. Someone else passed around the canteens. It wasn't organized. It was understood. Ellie paused at the edge of the field watching them. Their movements weren't perfect, but they were intentional. Something had shifted. Jack stepped forward and handed her a folded list. No words. Just quiet respect. At the top, the names of every recruit. At the bottom, written in small print. You showed us how to carry more than gear. Ellie didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. She looked out toward the horizon, not away from them, but beyond. As if her mission hadn't ended, just changed. And then, almost as an afterthought, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the old piece of cloth GR-26, frayed worn. She knelt, gently laid it under the bench at the far end of the range, the same one she sat by that first day. Not to let go, but to leave it. For whoever came next. Because legacy isn't just what you survive. It's what you leave behind quietly. For someone else to carry forward. If someone ever carried you without asking, let them know you saw it. And, for the first time in years, Ellie didn't feel like the last one standing.